Did you know Ed Wood had absolutely no money at the time of his death and died in a friend's apartment? Billie Holiday had just 70 cents in her bank account when she passed away, and Judy Garland was a staggering $4 million in debt at the end of her life. They aren't the only ones. Many Golden Age actors were either steeped in debt or completely broke at the time of their deaths. First, Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was an American singer, actor, comedian, and dancer who rose to fame as a child performer in vaudeville. Over the years, he entertained millions with his unmistakable voice, smooth dance moves, and dazzling stage presence. Despite earning considerable wealth, Sammy Davis Jr. faced mounting financial troubles that would ultimately overshadow his success. His lavish lifestyle was fueled by multiple homes, expensive cars, and opulent jewelry. However, poor financial decisions played a huge role in his downfall. To avoid paying high taxes, Davis invested large sums of money into questionable tax shelters. When those investments went south, the IRS reassessed his liabilities and slapped him with a staggering $15 million tax bill by 1990. Desperate to recoup some funds, he agreed to tour with friends Frank Sinatra and Liza Minnelli, even as he battled throat cancer. When Davis passed away in 1990 at the age of 64, his estate, estimated at around $4 million, was dwarfed by the massive debt he owed. The IRS forced his widow, Altavice Davis, to sell off much of his real estate and personal possessions. Tragically, the man dubbed Mr. Show Business died virtually penniless, a victim of excessive spending and disastrous financial management. Second, Judy Garland. Judy Garland captured the hearts of millions as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz and later became a beloved star of stage and screen. Throughout her storied career, she reportedly earned close to $40 million. Yet by 1969, at just 47 years old, she died leaving behind a staggering $4 million in debts. The bulk of this financial nightmare stemmed from various factors, chief among them was poor money management by her agents and multiple ex-husbands who mishandled her earnings. Adding insult to injury, her compassionate nature led her to give money freely to friends and acquaintances, further depleting her funds. Despite several successful comeback tours, including a lucrative run at New York's Palace Theater, much of Garland's income was seized by the IRS to settle unpaid taxes. In her final days, she was relegated to small club performances, struggling with mounting debt and an exhausting schedule. After her passing, close friend Frank Sinatra stepped in to cover funeral expenses, while her daughter Liza Minnelli worked diligently to pay off lingering debts. Judy Garland's fate stands as a cautionary tale. Even towering talent and enviable fame can vanish in the face of spiraling financial pressures, mismanagement, and a deeply generous spirit. Third, George Raft. George Raft's life took a grim financial turn, despite once being among Hollywood's most recognizable gangster film stars. Famous for roles in Scarface and Some Like It Hot, he projected an aura of cool sophistication. Off-screen, however, he was a notorious gambler. Heavy losses at racetracks, card tables, and casinos chipped away at his substantial paychecks, which reportedly soared as high as $18,000 a week at his peak. In a string of near misses, Raft turned down lead roles that would later catapult Humphrey Bogart to stardom. He did movies like Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon. This combination of poor choices and ongoing financial recklessness gradually eroded his career opportunities. By the mid-1960s, a mountain of debt caught up to Raft. He officially declared bankruptcy in 1966, admitting he could no longer meet his obligations. Attempts at rejuvenating his star power fell short. Public appearances and small movie roles never matched the glamour of his earlier years. He spent his final stretch doing promotional gigs in Europe and occasional cameos to pay the bills. When he passed away in 1980, the once celebrated actor left behind only a $10,000 insurance policy and some furniture. Ultimately, his story underscores how even a stylish leading man, once showered in wealth, can lose it all through ill-fated decisions and unrelenting gambling debts. 4. Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle's financial world collapsed beneath the weight of astronomical legal fees, a burden that would haunt him even after his name was cleared. Born Roscoe Conkling Arbuckle, He was once a towering figure of early Hollywood comedy, signing a $1 million per year contract with Paramount in 1920. Yet all that success vanished in 1921 when he found himself embroiled in a scandal surrounding the death of actress Virginia Rappe. Though he was eventually acquitted of manslaughter, Arbuckle had to endure 3 high-profile criminal trials that racked up $700,000 in legal fees, the equivalent of around $13 million today. In desperation, he sold his mansion and luxury cars just to stay afloat. Studios and theaters began to remove his films from circulation due to the negative publicity. Despite being exonerated, Arbuckle's public image never fully recovered, leaving him effectively blacklisted. At one point, his dear friend and fellow comedian Buster Keaton stepped in, offering him a percentage of profits from Keaton's own productions to ease the financial strain. Arbuckle's attempts at a comeback were painfully slow, forcing him to work under a pseudonym. While he did find some modest redemption directing short films, the once mighty silent star died in 1933, leaving behind a legacy tarnished by scandal and drained by crushing debts. 5th John Barrymore. John Barrymore weathered a storm of debts that overshadowed his reputation as one of the greatest stage actors of his time. He hailed from the illustrious Barrymore family. Siblings Ethel and Lionel were also legendary performers, and carved a niche for himself on Broadway, mastering Shakespearean roles with riveting flair. Hollywood soon beckoned, and he transitioned to film, earning big for hits like Grand Hotel. Yet Barrymore's fortunes took a downward turn due to a lethal cocktail of extravagant living, chronic alcoholism, and multiple costly divorces. His spiraling expenditures forced him into bankruptcy in 1937, with creditors hounding him for unpaid bills. Despite these challenges, he kept working to pay off debts, accepting parts in films that never lived up to the prestige he once commanded on stage. Reportedly, Barrymore's drinking worsened as his financial obligations mounted, and even longtime admirers and studios grew hesitant to invest in his projects. By the time of his death in 1942, he had lost much of the regal stature he'd once enjoyed, leaving behind liabilities his estate struggled to settle. While lauded in retrospect for his groundbreaking performances, Barrymore's life also stands as a sobering tale of how personal demons and unchecked spending can dismantle even the most revered careers. 6. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge was drowning in financial woes when the world should have been celebrating her stardom as the first African-American woman to be nominated for an Oscar in a leading role. During her prime, her powerful performances in Carmen Jones and her appearances in high-profile nightclubs brought her steady fame and a respectable income. But between unscrupulous financial managers and chronic racial discrimination, she saw her earnings evaporate. When Dandridge discovered that her advisors had swindled her out of $150,000, she also learned she owed $139,000 in back taxes to the IRS. Desperate, she was forced to sell her Hollywood home and place her daughter in a state hospital for care. With dwindling career opportunities, Dandridge resorted to performing in small clubs to stay afloat, a stark contrast to the sold-out venues she once commanded. Filing for bankruptcy offered little relief. Lawsuits and ever-present debts continued to mount. By 1965, she hoped to revive her film career in Mexico, but tragedy struck when she was found dead in her modest West Hollywood apartment at just 42. A mere $24 in her bank account served as a heartbreaking reminder that a groundbreaking star never escaped the financial hardships that plagued her final days. 7th, Ed Wood. Ed Wood's financial world spiraled into ruin long before he drew his final breath, overshadowing a career that, despite its campy legacy, once held genuine promise. Known for low-budget cult classics like Plan 9 from Outer Space and Glen or Glenda, Wood generated income in the 1950s and 1960s by churning out pulp novels and quick turnaround screenplays. Unfortunately, his earnings, often around $700 to $1,000 per novel, disappeared as fast as he made them. Most poured into his mounting bar tabs. Struggling to pay rent, Ed and his wife lived in a revolving door of rundown apartments where eviction was a constant threat. His Hollywood contacts evaporated after a series of box office flops, leading him to resort to even cheaper productions. Friends recall Wood lamenting that he should be a millionaire for all his work, yet he was drowning in debts with no real hope of recovery. In 1978, he and his wife were kicked out of their grimy, crime-ridden apartment by the sheriff for failing to keep up with rent. Desperate phone calls to old colleagues for loans yielded nothing. Days later, in a borrowed apartment, Ed Wood died from a heart attack. A penniless visionary to some and a cinematic joke to others, his final chapter was one of tragedy and poverty. 8. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday died with scarcely any money to her name, a gut-wrenching end to one of the most influential jazz careers of the 20th century. Nicknamed Lady Day, she soared to stardom in the 1930s and 1940s, performing at prestigious venues and commanding high fees. Her voice, both husky and heart-wrenching, left audiences spellbound, while hits like Strange Fruit and God Bless the Child pushed social boundaries. But even at the height of her acclaim, Holiday was steadily sinking into debt due to her harrowing heroin addiction and heavy alcohol use. Many of her earnings were squandered on drugs or siphoned by opportunistic lovers and managers. Matters worsened when she lost her New York cabaret card following a drug conviction, forcing her to perform only in theaters or other venues without liquor licenses, significantly reducing her earning power. As her health declined, Holiday realized her record royalties were practically non-existent. Some of her older releases even went out of print. In May 1959, she was arrested again for drug possession and died 2 months later, handcuffed to her hospital bed. The great Billie Holiday left just 70 cents in the bank, a devastating reminder that genius alone can't safeguard against financial ruin and exploitation. 9. Bud Abbott. Bud Abbott found himself in a downward spiral of debt that would overshadow his past triumphs as half of the legendary comedic duo, Abbott and Costello. At their pinnacle, Bud and Lou Costello were among Hollywood's highest-earning stars, captivating audiences with classic routines like Who's on First and making 36 films between 1940 and 1956. Yet extravagant living, coupled with intense gambling habits, quickly eroded the fortune both men built. Worse still, the IRS demanded back taxes from them after World War II, forcing them to liquidate prized assets, including the rights to their popular films. As their comedic appeal began to wane in the mid-1950s, Universal refused to meet the duo's salary demands, effectively ending their long and profitable partnership with the studio. Over time, Bud's health deteriorated, and without the financial safety net once provided by blockbuster hits, he slid further into hardship. He was eventually forced to appeal publicly for funds, having lost his home to the IRS. When his partner Lou passed away, Bud tried continuing solo appearances, but never regained the momentum they once enjoyed together. By the time he died in 1974, the man who made millions laugh was living in near poverty, his debts a stark footnote to one of comedy's most iconic acts. DeSaty Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton faced debilitating financial hardships that cut through his legacy as one of silent cinema's greatest comedians and stunt innovators. Despite earning $3,500 per week in the 1920s and building a lavish Beverly Hills estate, Keaton's life veered off course when he signed with MGM in 1928. Once creatively independent, he now had to conform to a studio system that dampened his signature style. Meanwhile, his personal life also unraveled. A turbulent divorce from Natalie Talmadge led to a financial freefall. By 1934, Keaton was forced to file for bankruptcy, declaring assets of just $12,000 against mounting debts. Stripped of his home and creative freedom, he struggled in forgettable B-movies, a far cry from his earlier masterpieces like The General. Even so, he retained a spark of resilience, directing and writing for other comedians, and eventually making cameo appearances on television to rebuild his finances. Later in life, Keaton found renewed respect as film historians rediscovered his genius, but his career never fully reclaimed the financial promise of his silent-era heyday. He died in 1966, praised as a comedic legend, but the economic troubles that once plagued him cast a long shadow over his final years. Lefty Redd Foxx. Redd Foxx became a legendary figure in American comedy, known for his edgy nightclub act and iconic sitcom Sanford and Son. At the height of his career, he reportedly earned up to $4 million in a single year. Yet Fox's fortunes took a nosedive due to massive unpaid tax bills and multiple costly divorces. By the late 1980s, the IRS had filed liens against him for back taxes dating from 1983 to 1986, totaling $996,000, a number that only kept growing with penalties and interest, eventually soaring to over $3.6 million. Faced with ever-increasing financial woes, Fox filed for bankruptcy in 1983. His extravagant tastes in cars, homes, and gifts added to the mounting debt. Worse yet, each divorce settlement demanded substantial alimony and support payments. In a dramatic display of his troubles, the IRS even seized his Las Vegas home, 7 cars, and numerous personal items, allegedly leaving him with only his bed. When Fox passed away in 1991 at age 68, he was still deeply in debt. His burial expenses were graciously handled by longtime friend Eddie Murphy, highlighting how a beloved comedic legend, once rolling in wealth, ended his life in crushing financial ruin. 12th, Florence Ballard. Florence Ballard lived her final days in the shadow of financial despair, a heartbreaking contrast to the dazzling heights she once reached as a founding member of the Supremes. At their peak in the 1960s, the Supremes rivaled the Beatles in fame and earned staggering amounts for each performance. Ballard's rich vocals, labeled by Motown's Berry Gordy as the backbone of their sound, were crucial to hits like Where Did Our Love Go and Baby Love. Sadly, conflicts within the group, bouts of depression, and a brewing alcohol problem took their toll. By 1967, Ballard was ousted from the group, and her short-lived solo career with ABC Records never gained traction. Mounting legal issues, unpaid taxes, and meager royalties from her earlier successes eroded her finances. In the early 1970s, her family home was foreclosed, and she turned to welfare assistance. Though she fought to rebuild her life, performing small gigs and planning a comeback, her health deteriorated. In 1976, she died at just 32, leaving behind 3 children and virtually no savings. The singer who once graced the world's biggest stages departed under the darkest of financial clouds. A tragic end for the woman who helped define the sound of Motown's golden era. 13. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney ended his remarkable career under the crushing weight of money woes, a tragic twist for one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. As a child star under Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in the 1930s and 1940s, Rooney was among the highest-paid actors in the world, headlining the popular Andy Hardy series and films like Boys Town. His charm and boundless energy earned him massive wealth, which he used freely. Unfortunately, multiple divorces, he married 8 times, and lavish spending habits left him chronically strapped for cash. In his later years, elder abuse accusations surfaced. Rooney testified before Congress in 2011 about financial exploitation by a stepchild who allegedly drained his bank accounts. By the time he passed away in 2014 at 93, he was subsisting on a fraction of the fortune he once possessed. Despite over 300 film credits and a career spanning 9 decades, reports suggest he had only about $18,000 to his name. His estate became mired in disputes between his wife and children, reflecting the deeply fractured family dynamics that defined his final chapter. For a legendary entertainer lauded for his on-screen exuberance, the stark reality of Rooney's finances serves as a somber reminder that fame doesn't always lead to fortune. 14. Bobby Driscoll. Bobby Driscoll sank into dire financial straits that starkly contrasted with his once sparkling Hollywood image. At his peak in the 1940s and 1950s, Driscoll was Walt Disney's prized child actor. Beloved for live-action hits like Song of the South and Treasure Island, and later as the voice of Peter Pan. He earned as much as $1,750 per week, an astonishing sum for a child star of his era. Yet his success unraveled when he hit adolescence. He struggled to secure meaningful roles, and a growing dependency on narcotics began chipping away at his health and finances. By his early 20s, Driscoll had served time for drug possession and found himself rejected by the same industry that once championed him. Repeated attempts at a comeback fizzled. Gigs were scarce, and any remaining wealth was consumed by legal fees, rehab costs, and the downward spiral of addiction. Desperate and unable to resurrect his career, he left Hollywood for New York, hoping for a second act on stage. That dream never materialized. In 1968, Driscoll's body was discovered in a dilapidated East Village tenement, identified only months later via fingerprint match. A tragic end to a former Disney icon, he died penniless and alone, a heartbreaking cautionary tale of childhood stardom gone awry. 15. Cliff Edwards. Cliff Edwards found his final years haunted by poverty, a sobering fate for the man who once thrilled the nation with his ukulele and distinctive vocals. Known in the 1920s as Ukulele Ike, Edwards scored a string of hits, including a popular rendition of Singin' in the Rain. Hollywood then beckoned, and he famously became the voice of Jiminy Cricket in Walt Disney's Pinocchio. Yet even with these iconic achievements, Edwards' finances were under constant siege by failed marriages. He wed 3 times, and a taste for luxurious living. His earnings plummeted during the Great Depression, but his spending habits never adjusted. With alimony payments piling up and a gambling addiction draining his savings, Edwards declared bankruptcy multiple times throughout the 1930s and 1940s. Desperate for steady work, he took whatever small acting or voice gigs he could find. Walt Disney quietly covered some of Edwards' medical costs in later years, acknowledging the singer's huge contribution to the studio's legacy. Tragically, upon his death in 1971, Edwards was a charity patient with no assets. His body initially marked for medical research when unclaimed. Only after Disney employees discovered the situation did the Actors Fund arrange for a modest burial, honoring a man who once lit up stages nationwide but slipped into obscurity and hardship at life's end. 16th, Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker found herself grappling with severe financial burdens, even as her fame soared across continents. Fleeing racial discrimination in the United States, she charmed Parisian audiences in the 1920s and 1930s with her captivating dance routines and sultry singing. At her peak, Baker was one of Europe's most celebrated performers, earning the equivalent of millions in modern currency. Her personal life, however, proved as extravagant as her onstage persona. She adopted 12 children, her rainbow tribe, and maintained a sprawling chateau in the French countryside, both of which demanded staggering upkeep costs. When World War II devastated Europe, Baker's performances brought in less revenue, and her philanthropic ventures cut deeply into her savings. She also faced racially charged refusals for certain bookings, limiting her income streams. Eventually, mounting debts forced her into bankruptcy in 1968, and she lost her beloved chateau. Nevertheless, her resilience was legendary. With the help of admirers like Princess Grace of Monaco, Baker managed to stage one final comeback in 1975, performing a sold-out revue in Paris that garnered glowing reviews. Sadly, only days after this triumphant return, she suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and passed away. Despite her global stature and groundbreaking legacy, Josephine Baker left a financial legacy marked by loss, debt, and unwavering generosity. 17th, Gary Coleman. Gary Coleman endured a life of ongoing financial peril, an ironic twist given his early fame and success. As Arnold Jackson on the hit sitcom Diff'rent Strokes, Coleman was one of television's most recognizable child actors in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Despite his small stature due to congenital kidney disease, he commanded a salary rivaling that of adult stars and even launched a string of lucrative endorsements. However, Coleman's earnings slipped away under the dubious supervision of his parents and financial managers, leading him to file a lawsuit against them for mismanagement and fraud. By the 1990s, Coleman was no longer landing significant roles, and his medical bills continued piling up. With limited work, he fell back on cameo appearances in sporadic reality TV spots, each time admitting that money was tight. In 1999, he filed for bankruptcy, citing staggering debt and few viable options in an industry that often discards child stars once they age out of cuteness. Coleman's struggles turned public and at times confrontational, with documented altercations and personal tragedies. When he died in 2010 at just 42, Little remained of the fortune he had amassed as a child sensation. His story endures as a stark reminder of fame's fleeting nature and the vital importance of careful financial stewardship. Osamnayesti Donna Plato. Donna Plato spent her final years balancing on a financial tightrope, a far cry from her carefree childhood stardom on Diff'rent Strokes. Playing Kimberly Drummond, Plato became a familiar face on American television in the late 1970s and early 1980s, but her career abruptly nosedived once the show ended. Attempting to navigate Hollywood as an adult, she found meaningful roles elusive. Mounting bills led to questionable decisions. She took minor parts in low-budget films, posed for adult magazines, and at one point worked in a dry cleaning shop to keep afloat. Her problems were compounded by substance abuse, which not only tarnished her public image, but also drained any money she managed to earn. A highly publicized arrest for robbing a video store in 1991 highlighted her desperation. Legal fees and mandatory rehabilitation programs weighed heavily on her already fragile finances. Though she tried a few modest comebacks, the paychecks never matched her previous earnings, and debts lingered. Tragically, Dana Plato died in 1999 at just 34. Her struggles with addiction and financial woes leaving a painful legacy. She became another cautionary tale of a child actor who rose quickly only to stumble under the relentless pressure and stark realities of life beyond the sitcom spotlight. 19th, Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn battled crippling financial woes that starkly contradicted his image as Hollywood's swashbuckling superstar. Best remembered for swashbucklers like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, Flynn was once among the highest-paid leading men in Tinseltown. Yet his off-screen escapades, lavish spending on yachts, multiple homes, and extravagant parties, gradually eroded his fortune. Legal troubles, including a very public 1943 trial where he was acquitted of statutory rape, led to enormous legal fees. During the 1940s, Flynn also developed an addiction to alcohol, tobacco, and narcotics, which only accelerated his downward financial spiral. Divorce settlements further drained his bank account. His ex-wife, actress Lily Demita, reportedly received a large share of his wealth. In a bid to recapture success, Flynn attempted independent film projects, most notably an ill-fated production of William Tell, which collapsed when investors pulled out, leaving him in severe debt. His health deteriorated just as his finances hit rock bottom. In 1959, at only 50 years old, he traveled to Vancouver, hoping to negotiate the lease of his yacht, Zaka, to ease money troubles. Instead, he succumbed to a heart attack. The once dashing star who epitomized adventure on screen died in near poverty, illustrating how extravagant living and chronic missteps can overshadow even the brightest Hollywood legacy. 20th, Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton sank into financial ruin as swiftly as she had soared to stardom in late 1940s Hollywood. Initially a rising star who earned as much as $10,000 a week, a fortune for a budding actress, she was featured opposite names like Lloyd Bridges in Trapped and James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. Yet her personal life quickly spiraled out of control. Public scandals, especially her turbulent love triangle with actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, made headlines when Neal savagely beat Tone, leaving him in a coma. Studios deemed Payton box office poison following the scandal, leading to rapid loss of roles. Desperate for income, she took any part she could get, but film offers dwindled. By the early 1960s, she turned to prostitution and heavy substance abuse to cope. Alcoholism and drug dependency ravaged her health, draining whatever meager funds remained. In 1963, she received $2,000 for a confessional book titled, I Am Not Ashamed. Yet even that failed to restore her financially. Heart and liver damage claimed her life at 39, with no money for her name. Quietly cremated and largely forgotten by Hollywood, Barbara Payton's downfall showed how scandal and addiction can obliterate a once promising career in an unforgiving industry. 21st, Marie Prevost. Marie Prevost faced a tragic descent into poverty, her later years a far cry from her status as one of Hollywood's beloved silent film stars. She was a Canadian-born actress who made a successful transition from modeling to the silver screen, thriving in comedic collaborations with famed director Ernst Lubitsch. In the 1920s, audiences adored her flirty charm in hits like The Marriage Circle and Kiss Me Again, and Warner Brothers regarded her as a bankable talent. But with the advent of talkies, her once glittering career began to fade. The new technology exposed vocal limitations, and studios gradually relegated her to minor roles. Personal turmoil escalated her downfall. The sudden death of her mother in 1926, followed by a bitter divorce, fueled deep depression. Prevost sought comfort in alcohol and food, leading to weight gain that sidelined her from starring roles. By 1935, she was reduced to bit parts, sometimes earning little more than a day's wage. Financial hardships forced her to live in cheap accommodations with no safety net. In January 1937, she died alone at the age of 40, her estate valued at a mere $300. Marie Prevost's decline was so stark, it helped spur the creation of the motion picture and television Country House and Hospital, a final legacy tied to heartbreak and caution. 22nd, Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake endured crushing financial struggles that belied her unforgettable image as a 1940s screen siren. Known for her peekaboo hairstyle and sultry film noir roles, often alongside Alan Ladd, Lake's star power soared during World War II. Behind the glamour, however, the actress wrestled with alcoholism and a reputation for being difficult to work with. By the late 1940s, major studios found her unreliability unprofitable, and she slipped from A-list heights to minimal roles. Mounting debts, unpaid taxes, and strained marriages ate away at her wealth. In 1951, the IRS seized her home due to outstanding taxes, and soon after, Lake and her then-husband declared bankruptcy. Unable to resurrect her career in Hollywood, she drifted to television, appearing in scattered guest spots that hardly covered her bills. Depression and near-constant financial anxieties plagued her, fueling a deeper reliance on alcohol. By the early 1960s, she was discovered working anonymously as a waitress in a New York City hotel bar, far removed from the spotlight she once dominated. Lake's final years were marred by declining health. Hospitalized in Vermont with hepatitis and acute kidney injury, she passed away in 1973, alone and virtually penniless. A haunting end to the luminous actress whose golden hair once graced America's silver screens. 23rd, Terry Thomas. Terry Thomas found his final days overshadowed by severe money woes, a harsh contrast to his bygone era as Britain's quintessential upper-class cad in film comedies of the 1950s and 1960s. With a trademark, gap-toothed grin and impeccable comedic timing, Terry Thomas captivated audiences in classics like It's a Mad, 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 Mad World and Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines. Yet off-screen, his life spiraled into medical and financial despair. Diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 1971, he struggled to secure roles that could accommodate his waning physical abilities. As the disease progressed, Terry Thomas spent a fortune, some estimates place it at $40,000 per year, on treatments and care. With offers drying up and no steady paycheck, he and his wife were forced to sell their dream home in Spain, ultimately ending up in modest, unfurnished London flats. Fellow actors were shocked by the transformation of a once dapper star into a frail patient who could hardly move. In 1989, friends organized a charity event that raised $775,000 to fund his nursing home care, offering him a semblance of comfort near the end. He passed away in 1990 at 78, his signature charm forever immortalized in film, while his finances were nearly depleted by the relentless cost of illness. 24. Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was hailed as the king of rock and roll, his groundbreaking music and charismatic performances electrifying fans around the world. From his legendary Las Vegas residencies to countless chart-topping hits, he was among the highest-earning entertainers of his era. Reports suggest he made anywhere from $100 million to $1 billion over his career. Yet behind the gates of Graceland, Elvis's finances were in disarray. His lavish spending habits were practically boundless. Dozens of Cadillacs gifted to friends and family, multiple luxury homes, show-stopping performance costumes, and even a fleet of private jets. Unfortunately, those habits, combined with mismanagement and questionable deals orchestrated by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who allegedly took a 50% cut, left Elvis owing roughly $10 million in back taxes at the time of his death. Despite still drawing crowds in his final years, the singer's intense touring schedule took a toll. Struggling with prescription drug dependency, health problems, and divorces, his financial burdens grew heavier. When Elvis passed away suddenly in 1977 at only 42, he had about $5 million in the bank, far too little to settle his debts. It was his ex-wife, Priscilla Presley, who ultimately salvaged his estate by turning Graceland into a profitable tourist attraction, paying off creditors and building the Elvis brand into a posthumous empire.